IndieWire, but my little joke is that no one is here to see me. You are here to see these fine people, including Tina Satter, the writer, co-writer, and director of reality, Paul Lee, our cinematographer, and Jen Vecchiarello, our editor. Let's get right into it. Did you guys enjoy the film? So I'm going to start with what would generally be kind of a softball, but I don't think it is. Tina, this is your first film. And you come from a theatrical background. Can you tell us a little bit about the genesis of this project? Because it's crazy.
This happened on June 3rd, 2017, which is sort of, by the next day, reality winners sort of in the American news, and it's never really been covered that much, but I didn't really pay attention very much to that story at all, like many, many people I've since spoken to. Like, her name, of course, stuck out. I'd seen like a mugshot of her in the New York Times. I don't think I could have even told you like in August of that year what that person had done. But I was just reading online in December 2017, and there was like a longer form article about her, and it had more pictures. And I was like, just again, totally just rereading, but I was like, wow, this young woman is fascinating. This story is completely fascinating. And in that same first read of just being really into something I stumbled upon, there was a hyperlink that says something like, read about the day reality winners visited our home by the FBI. And so I clicked that, and that went off of the New York Magazine site I'd been reading to Politico, and up came a scanned PDF. And it looked like a play to me, actually, because it was like, and you could see the copy, which, I mean, we ended up putting, of course, version of this in the movie, but like, said verbatim transcription at the top in a big stamp, and it listed out these participants, one of whom was called Unknown Male, and I was like, okay, you definitely have me, because that is so weird, and all that. And this document was just completely fascinating, and I read it, and I've said this, I read it like a thriller. I mean, I read it knowing this young woman's in prison, but I'm like, when do they get her? Like, when does she admit? Why are they talking about cats again? Like, I couldn't believe how amazing this was. I was like, this girl in jean shorts is going head to head with these dudes. I think there is something in this, and I usually had been making plays. That's what I've been doing in New York City, but I've been so interested in film, but always was really caught in my theater cycle. But I was like, just had that other kind of instinctual thing. I'm like, this is a movie I feel like I could do, So it was really coming upon that transcript. And I did first make it as a play, and then that took on a great life of its own. It was all exactly the transcript, and then in the beginning of the pandemic, I finally had the time, and I sat down and wrote the first draft of the screenplay.
Was reality involved at all with the play or with the film?
She wasn't involved really at all with the play. She was in prison entirely through that time. I was in touch with her mom and sister, but very like, this is what I'm doing. They gave their blessing, but no, real conversations at all. I mean, none with her, but even with them, not about what the work was. She was released from prison in June 2021, at which point the movie was in the works, but not fully going. And she was a bit involved in prep for that, in telling me more details of some of the day. And she spoke to the costume designer, and Risha Kardish, and the production designer, Tommy Love, really always just kind of giving us details that were helpful to us. So, and she's very funny and very generous person in that way.
So can you talk about some of your early meetings with Paul and Jen about how we're going to align this vision that is crazy and so interesting and different, and the process that goes into it?
Sure. I mean, I can say, and then they could chime in, but I was a big fan of Paul's work, especially in the movie The Fits, but I was a huge fan of it, and when we first spoke, it turned out Paul had seen one of the iterations of the play of Is the Room, which is what that language from the transcript is what the play was called. And so that was kind of great, because it was like, although they were going to be so different, and I knew that and hoped that someone understood my artistic impulse towards like this FBI administrative document as a piece of drama. And and then we had this constraint that I loved, but I was realizing quickly it was also incredibly challenging. Like I knew that, but I was like, no, we can do it. Like the one room and all this stuff. And Paul was just really incredibly, of course, like my first movie, but just like the most amazing partner. But like, yeah, really us imagining through, I had just moved into this apartment, so it was completely empty. And we would meet there, and the room happened to be close to the size of that white room. So we would just sort of like imagine into that in particular, because that felt a really hard thing to crack, like that, you know, almost maybe third of the movie at least. So it was just, I knew what I wanted, which was to be close to it, to sort of have this inside reality's emotional landscape, and that was a lot of our conversations.
Yeah, I mean, like Tina said, I had seen the play before, and it was so reassuring to know that it worked. You know, that the dialogue itself, the transcript itself worked in an even more spare setting. Like, you know, the play is just sort of like a black space, and it's just Island. We would have more tools. You know, we'd have you know, editing and the ability to choose angles that people see. You know, from a production standpoint, it was nice to know that in the end, all we really needed to do was capture the dialogue in a way that honored, the transcript and their performances. And I think with independent movies, sometimes you just don't, you go into them not really knowing what they're going to be. But with this, I always knew, I was like, I've seen the play, and the play is so good. And if we can honor that, then you know, the movie will be at least as good as the play.
There's a lot to say about speaking with Jen or Vecchiarello, who was another incredible life-saving collaborator on this. But I think the thing I wanted that, you know, I think one of the most meaningful things was I was really dying to sort of figure out a way to get the real reality into it. Like some of those things which are into it, like some of the images of her and her social media, because some of those were written into what was the screenplay, like that this would come up, certain photos of her, but they're actually, you know, different where they ended up. And Jen just really got, I mean, among other million things, but really understood the poetics of that attempt that I wanted to do. Like, can we get this molecular thing of the real reality in here, not take away from these incredible performances that these actors are doing, but like get the sense that she was real to like sort of simmer throughout this. And that was one of the first like great things, because Jen was just like, we can do that, and here's ways to start experimenting with that.
Yeah, Jen, I was going to ask, like, the photos, and then when we see, you know, what the audio looks like, I'm so fascinated because it really works, and I can imagine a world where it didn't work. So can you talk about the process and working through that with Tina?
Yeah, no, that was, I mean, it was definitely a journey. You know, I think we did a lot of experimentation on like how much of the photos, how much of the transcript, how much of the waveforms, how much we could use that stuff. And I think it was always the balance of wanting to remind people that this is real, this really happened. All of these absurd moments are taken straight from the paper, which I think is just what really makes it soar for me. Like, I think whenever we wanted a reminder that something was so crazy, like, no, we need to remind people that this happened, that was when we kind of turned to it. But we definitely, you know, we went through phases where we had some more of the audio waveform and some more of the transcript, and we started paring down a little bit, and then we'd add it where we needed. And it's kind of like a little bit of seasoning. It's like the spice to remind us of it. I think it helped capture the absurdity, which was so great and so clear and powerful in the play, which I thought we really wanted to capture in the film too.
Well, there are moments, many of them thanks to Unknown Male, that are very funny in this. And so I was curious about that process, because you get like these little breaths when he's like, oh, is it an iPhone? And you're like, what? And so how did you work through that? Because it does give you a moment when you can stop feeling like you're going to freak out.
Yeah, I mean, that was probably one of the most important things to me, because that was, you know, I had seen the play as well. And I had seen it in January of like I saw it at the Vineyard in January of 2020. It was like one of the last things I saw before the pandemic kind of shut everything down. And what I remembered about it was laughing so much, like in these really unexpected ways, and really enjoying it. And I feel like we really I think we worked hard to try to capture those moments in the film when we could. I mean, it's a very tense film. It's not a comedy by any means. but there is so much humor in it too, and I think that was part of the process, was finding that balance of where to mine those moments. And the performances were so good, and it was in there. Like, my job was easy because of everything Paul had done and because of these amazing performances and everything Tina did. Like, it was fun.
Well, speaking of performances, obviously our star could not be here with us, but I wanted to talk a little bit about Sydney because I read some of her process, and to say that she went for it and she learned the cadences of reality speech, and I think that adds, it's these words that she's saying feel sort of crazy, but they're coming from a very real place, and she got to that. So can you talk about, casting Sydney and all of you working with her, because she's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, she's just excellent, and she's like the hardest worker. I mean, kind of all the things you say, but are very, very real in Sydney's case. She is such a hard worker and was so committed to it, and is just totally game. It's not even like she's just there to do it. She's really excellent in that way. Her and I had a Zoom before she was even on the project, and she read for the part actually. So before that, her and I just Zoomed, and I had seen her in some of her TV that we all know, and I knew she was excellent actor, but I was still like, is this person reality, who I was also very close to that role from having made the play. And it was really in that first conversation, first her intelligence was very clear, and her curiosity, and she hadn't known who reality was at all, but like, it wasn't just that she'd done her research, but she just had the very Sydney, straightforward, thoughtful way she was already thinking about reality. And it just started to strike me, especially as I got to know reality and then how much I knew of, as I got to know Sydney, I do that all the time now, but as I got to know, what I knew of reality, and then as I got to know Sydney, they're both these really particular young women who have come up through a world, their lives are so different, and we're so different, but have been thought of a certain way and had this like kind of idiosyncratic focus. Sydney really is actually like that. She's really carved out her particular way of going. I think even going for this part is another. But so there was a way, their age was so similar. She had decided who she was going to be, even as a young woman, she was going to be seen another way, and kind of try to own that. And I think that's so much of what reality was struggling with too. So there was just this really unexpected resonance for me once I first met Sydney, again on a Zoom, but it was like, oh, there is like kind of a little particular weirdness and a deep intelligence there. And that is what I see in reality. And I think if, she can channel some of that and find her way into it, this could be really unexpected and exciting portrayal. And then she's just like killing it, of course, behind the camera. And then, Jen said it was in the edit where you're like, of course, really like, oh, she's doing these cheek quivers or these under the skin things, but that's like some of the landscape of this movie, of course, is that stuff happening under reality space. So she was just excellent. But
it was, for me, it was very intimidating working with Sydney, because we were a fairly small production. We started as an independent movie before we were acquired, and on the first day on set, she came up to me and said, "It's been so long since I've worked on a movie where the DP operates the camera," and I think that's just her nature. She's just very frank and very honest, and I don't think she meant that as a slight or anything. It's just factual, and the way that I took it just humbled me so much. It was just, and the way I took it, and the way I reacted, I just said, yeah, me too. It's been so long. but she was really so game, and she's also just one of the, from a photographic standpoint, one of the most photogenic people I've ever had the privilege of having on a lens. There's, as you know what a first team, second team is, and so it's basically the second team is your stand-ins, and your first team is your talent, and who has the makeup and the wardrobe and everything. And with Sid, it was like the second team would be in and be like, it looks pretty good. But when I think it's good enough so that we can bring her in, like we can bring her in now, and we'll do like a rehearsal with her. But we brought her in and was like, this looks so good. It was effortless. She made everything look amazing. It really made my job really easy.
Jen, when you're in the editing room, do you have any favorite memories of things that you would see Sydney do? Because her facial expressions are extraordinary in this, and I feel like you must have just had a wealth of stuff to go through.
Yeah, and some of them are so subtle, but there's so much of it all the time. Like when she takes these very deliberate pauses, her eyes, like sometimes her eyes get a little bit wider. I mean, it's almost like creepy how well I know her face now. But yeah, no, there's so many subtle things. And, you know, I wasn't on set, so I don't know how much of that was a discussion with you, Tina, and how much of it she was just kind of going for. But whenever in doubt, if we ever felt stuck in something, we were like, well, let's just look at her cut. Like, let's see what she's doing. She's always giving something. And like, when in doubt, turn to her and see what's there. And she was kind of always being able to pull something out from underneath. But yeah, a lot of stuff with her eyes in particular.
Well, I read something about how she tried to do, like, she did CrossFit and yoga, so she would have this same sort of like muscle mass as reality, which is just like, wow, okay, yeah, go for it.
She just happens like super. I think she was like she did like wrestling or something. She was
Kickboxing, maybe?
Yeah, so I think that's already there. I think that foundation was.
Yeah, I mean, she's not like, reality was completely CrossFit ripped. So there is like, you know, some creative, but Sydney was someone who was actually athletic, and that was another thing that did feel helpful, because it was even how if we're gonna keep a camera on her for that, like what we did talk about a lot was like, this is a military girl, 4 years in the Air Force, and an athlete. So there's a way that this person stands, and that's what I don't have quite Jen's like editor eagle eye, but I really see her almost transform her neck and her shoulders throughout the movie into this way that you stand if you've just stood as a soldier for a long time, or as someone who's going to lift a lot of weights, and that is, again, it's really pretty nuanced physically. Of course, that's what good actors do, but she's super doing that.
I think there's a scene that's not in the cut where she's just lifting weights, and when we did those takes, she was actually just lifting weights, and when that stuff goes on for a while, she was just doing bicep curls. It was really kind of amazing that she was able to do that.
So in the beginning of the film, when we're first seeing her, Paul, you're sort of taking a surveillance eagle eye of her. And then as the film goes on, we get closer into her, and then we get into her head. And I think that those final scenes where it's like you feel you're in her, you have the colors, the tension. Can you talk about the process of putting that stuff together? Because you work up to it, and all of your work is working up to it. And by the end, you're like, I feel so much how she must have felt.
Yeah, you know, I that wasn't something that we had talked specifically about doing, but it's something that I love that came through in the edit, was that it really does start in this sort of wider, more objective, sort of procedural way. And then as the movie goes on, you're really becoming more visceral and sort of like in her world. And part of it, I mean, I think a lot of it is in the edit, obviously. But we did have to, because we didn't have a ton of time to shoot, we did have to make these decisions about the kind of coverage we were getting. So yeah, I mean, I think Tina was great with sort of mapping that out for us, where it's like this, we should feel really close here, we should feel really intense here. And yeah, sorry. End of thought.
The question I have is editing for tension, question mark.
Yeah, that's what I would say too. Yeah, it's really interesting, and I think it's probably one of the biggest challenges is keeping that tension, making sure it sustains itself, but not tipping over into boring or, you know, releasing any of it a little bit too soon. I think I kind of go back to what you were saying, Paul, about it being in the text. I mean, I think fortunately we were working with this document that had so much tension within it already, and like we just kind of were able to keep reminding ourselves to keep faith in that, because we know this works and the actors can sustain it. But I think it was a lot of like not being afraid of silence and long shots and just like staying in those moments, because, you know, like cutting dialogue, you lose it all. And these actors, their performances are so rich and they're giving so much almost more in those silences, in some ways, I think. And for me, that's where all the tension really like just climbs and soars and sings, and I love it. I just love tension.
There's so many scenes with Josh Hamilton like coughing so much, and you're just like, is this funny? It's making me anxious, and so good for all of you. The
The
coughing.
coughs are in the transcript. They're those are called, that's something they notate. And all the stutters. It's a fascinating document.
Has Reality seen the film?
She has not. It's just too much for her to relive that day. Her mom and sister, who she's very close with, have seen it a couple times. They were with us at its original premiere in Berlin. They've been here for it. So yeah, I know, she said publicly and to me and the producers, she's so grateful that people get to hear her in her words after, what has been said about her or how she was, when they were keeping her in prison and through the trial, like she took a plea deal, but like in her bail trials that they were putting a different spin on her. And this, at the least, even though it's something she does not want to watch herself go through again, she's very happy. I don't know if happy is even the word. It's extremely complicated, but she's very grateful that people see her in her words and see that these sorts of things happen. Like that, just, you know what I mean? Like breaking law, not breaking law. This is one thing that did occur. This is the state at work, and it's just people get to see that and decide how they feel about that.
Did she get her dog and cat back?
They were fine. The cat had kind of a crazy journey, but totally fine. And the dog was a foster dog, and so it did get adopted. But her mom and stepdad were there like immediately and took them in like by the next day from that. And she's got animals now, and she's really into them.
As an animal person, I was like really very invested in the cat and the dog. Well, thank you guys so much. The film it's streaming on Max. You can tell everyone that they can click it up and watch it and talk about it. And we're all gonna go out here and we can talk about it over some drinks and snacks. Sound good?
Thanks so much.
Thank you.